As an imam,
Yeah.
are you saying that we should boycott the elections?
So some of the ulama, they mentioned that it's permissible to vote, and some have gone even so far where they say it's even wajib. People who were once left are now MAGA. Why? Because even they're like, look, we had a limit.
It seems like the Muslims in the US are a lot more liberal than the Muslims in the UK.
Historically, even nobody wanted to vote for Democrats among the Muslims, but they were forced to. This, liberal agenda is seeping into our schools. Our children are being taught this. In many ways, we are all complicit in what the West does. We're not meant to live in a perpetual state of choosing evil, right?
As an imam, who should we vote for then if we're living in the US? Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of the MO, where we talk about what the Ummah needs to hear, not just what we want to hear. And today we have a very, very special guest, Sheikh Muzammil. Now, Sheikh Muzammil, he has done a master's at SOAS, he's done a master's at Azhar University, he is currently an imam in the UK, and he's been an imam in the US as well. And also a graduate from Darul Nadwa. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah,
Alhamdulillah.
good. So, first question.
Yeah.
How long you been in the UK?
Okay, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I've been here now about 3 years, a little bit over 3 years. Alhamdulillah.
Just off the bat, yeah? Quick answer. US or UK?
No, I think that's the reason for this, a majority of this podcast.
Of course, but what's your heart inclined to?
It's my heart is torn. I don't know, man. It's a tough one. Like the UK, obviously. Look, okay, if we're talking about Muslim community, which is what I think really defines the place where you want to be, where you want to set up, where you want to have a family, where you feel comfortable with your children growing up. If we're talking about the community itself, there's no doubt that the UK is a number of years advanced, right? In terms of the institutions we have, the facilities we have, the resources that we have, the projects that we've done and tried and failed and succeeded on. So there's a lot that we've learned.
But the fact that you're saying means that your heart is more to the UK then.
I'm in the UK at the moment. I work in this community. Definitely, I feel myself to be a part of the community, alhamdulillah. And I love so many of the people that I've met here and I've benefited from. So it's a part of me that, inshallah, will never go away. There are a lot of things that the US has as well. If you're looking at it, let's say, more of a dunyawi perspective, right? When you're looking at it more from what the world has to offer you, the standard of living generally in the US is higher. And I know a lot of people consider that. But if we're talking about the Muslim community, and if we're talking about, where you want to raise your kids, then in between these two options, at least, then the UK has more to offer just because of being an older community.
Yeah, we'll come to more of that inshallah in the podcast, but just quickly before I go into the questions. How did you end up in the UK? What's your story? Just quickly, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't want you to give all the details.
I'll try and make it as quick as possible. So I finished in Egypt when I was there during COVID time. I did my Magister Tamhidi. They divide the masters into two. So it's like a master's and an MPhil here. They have the Tamhidi and then they have the Risala. So I completed the Tamhidi and then I was working in the US as an imam in Houston. And I wanted to continue studies further. That was always the plan. And I thought, also I got recommendations from some of my teachers and some of the mashayikh that I was around, that why don't you do something from a Western, university, get that perspective, and also just the social weight that it carries. When I was there, obviously, there are things that are beneficial no matter where you go, but it was mostly, going through the motions. But it does hold a social weight to it, right? So I started applying to different places, and one of the options that came up that was constantly mentioned when I was in Egypt by a lot of the British students who were there was SOAS, and I know SOAS has a lot of connotations and stereotypes associated with it. But the thing that SOAS provided was it provided me the option and the opportunity to be in the UK, to be in London.
Mhm.
London is a very cosmopolitan global city. There's a lot of Islamic programs and a lot of shuyukh, a lot of teachers, a lot of institutions that are here. And more so than the university itself, I wanted to be in this environment in order to benefit from that and for my own growth. I spoke to my some of my teachers, conferred with my parents as well, and then decided to come here as a result of that. So I came here for SOAS, and then Alhamdulillah, since then I managed to stick around a little bit longer.
Nice, nice.
Hmm.
Look, today we've invited you because the US elections are around the corner.
Sure.
And for Muslims in the UK, we hear a lot about what's happening across the sea, but we don't know a lot of the details.
Mm.
Now, before we go into a little bit of the details, we struggle to understand life as a Muslim in the US.
Yeah.
Like, portray a picture for us a little bit.
Hmm.
Like, what is it? Because we have a lot of stereotypes of
Sure.
Americans in general. There was that viral video that they couldn't do basic math and they don't know basic geography. But obviously, clarify some of these stereotypes, but specifically Muslims. How is life as a
Right.
Muslim in the US?
Right. A good question. So there's a number of things that I would like to say. Um, America is it's not as homogenous as people would like to believe it is. There are, very different environments depending on which city you are in, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So if you're in New York, New York is probably very similar to the UK. I know a lot of people visit from the UK and they go to New York expecting the American experience, but in reality, it's just a busier form of London in many ways, from my own experience at least. There's a lot of culture there. There's a lot of culture here. So you'll find that, a lot of these individuals who go and visit, they don't notice things that are radically different. Beyond that, I think if you really want to see the heartlands of America, then you can go to Texas, you can go to the Midwest, you have Florida that has its own environment, you have California that has its own environment. And each of these places offer things that are unique. Now, as far as the Muslim community is concerned, there's 2 points. One, we're a global village,
Yeah.
right? We've become a global village. So there's a lot more similarities that unite us than that which divides us generally
Mm-hmm.
across the world today. That's heightened a little bit more when it comes to people who come from English-speaking countries, Anglophones. There's a lot more similarities between us as well, right? When it comes to the media, when it comes to entertainment and movies and television and so on and so forth, people consume American entertainment as well as British entertainment, no matter where you are. Even if you go and you look at the youth, who are they watching? People are watching Logan and KSI, and there's all of these collaborations that are happening. So
Mm-hmm.
that bridge is starting to be blurred within the larger mainstream American population, and that applies as well to the Muslims. There's a lot of like Islamic culture that is pervasive between the two, the same culture. You have the same shuyukh that are doing their programs in American
Yeah.
cities who are coming and
Mm-hmm.
doing it in British cities. Perhaps less so the other way around, just because of visa issues. Um, but as it is as it is. But I think that um, if you go to America, so what is life like for Americans, Muslims specifically?
And specifically the difference between like maybe your hometown,
Yeah.
Houston compared to New York, and then
Sure.
the
So New
Midwest.
York is again, like I said, similar to London. So if you're a Muslim there, your generally culture plays a bigger role for you than it does elsewhere. If you're Bengali, you're around more Bengalis. If you're, if you're Arab, you're around more Arabs. This is how, it's been culturally set up, and there are different neighborhoods that cater to different cultures. I have very close friends who are they're native, so they're African Americans, and they don't necessarily interact with some of my Pakistani friends who are from New York, although they live, in the same city. And they often have wildly different experiences of New York itself,
Mm.
despite being in the same city, due to various factors, class, due to, just their experiences and families and so on and so forth. Um, Whereas if you are in most other parts of the US, then you have what is like, known as the Muslim American scene. So this is if you're in Chicago, if you're in Dallas, if you're in Houston, if you're in Detroit, if you're in California, and so on and so forth. Muslim communities in these environments, uh, they're uh, you have to go back into the history a little bit. I don't know how much time we have. But when you take a look at the British, how they came to England
Mm.
in order to rebuild the empire, um, they came from generally a labor working class. I've heard stories. One of my friends from Mirpur, his uncle, I met him once, and he told me that back in the day they used to have like a couple different, they would have offices where people would go and they would uh, um, give, their land deeds, and then they would get, visas to go to
Subhanallah.
the UK, right? Um, that wasn't the case in the US. In the US, in 1965, you had the Immigrations Act that took place that catered to a specific group of people. Highly specialized workers,
Mm.
careerists that were specialized for, people from a certain educational background as well. So a lot of people that came to America, they came from generally upper social classes and
Mm.
economic classes within the Muslim world. And you can see the effects of that both in a positive way and a negative way. In a positive way, they were very well qualified in the Dunyawi sense, right? So they
Mm.
had wealth, they developed wealth very quickly after they came to the US. They were able to establish institutions, they were able to build a lot of, different programs that we now see today, a lot of different institutions that we have today, starting from, mass back in the day, and then eventually developing into ISNA and ICNA and all of the offshoots of these two major organizations, whether it's in your civil rights like CARE, whether it is in Islamic programming like Al Maghrib and Bayyina and so on and so forth. Ultimately, they all tie their roots back to a couple of these organizations as far as the immigrant community is
So
concerned.
this was the immigrants chasing the American dream,
This was the
basically.
immigrants chasing the American dream, and so and that comes with a lot of like benefits and privilege that allowed them to be in that situation in the first place. We often get this whole debate about the model minority, but it comes from a place where they were already selected in a
Mm.
very specific way to be where they are. Um, that has its shortcomings as well, which is that oftentimes many of these people they studied in private institutions, they studied in secular institutions, they were disconnected from their religious identity,
Mm.
more so than the British Muslims who came here. So when they went to the U.S., they were generally, going through the process of finding their faith, right? It was not it was taken for granted that okay, this is what the
Mm.
mullahs or the maulwis or the shuyukh they do, and there's a place for that. But when they went there, they saw that there was such a there was such a gap
Mm.
that existed between what their identity was as a Muslim and having a Muslim name and being of brown skin, a lot of them, compared to what the culture was providing them and what it sought from them. I have some relatives who are actually older,
Mm.
or one of my relatives, he passed away, but he told me a story when he was very young. He came, I think he was a college student. He was a college student. He came and he had an African American friend. And keep in mind, this is during the Jim Crow era. So he and his friend they went to the cinemas. They went to watch a movie, and at that time, they had the white fountain, the colored fountain, and in movie halls, a lot of African Americans weren't allowed inside.
Mm.
So the security guard, the usher, he's looking at them when they walk up, and he turns to the black guy and he says, "You're not allowed here." And he turns to my relative who's now passed away, rahimahullah, and so he says to his friend, "You're not allowed in." He says to him, "I don't know about you. You can go in now, but I'm not sure." Yeah. So this was the culture and this was the environment that they grew up in, and because of this, they were forced to find their faith, right? And they found it through these Islamic institutions that they built within the universities that eventually expanded and grew. So there's a broader sense of there's an identity of Islam that is very cultural. It's like about finding yourself again.
Mm.
So for these Islamic institutions, there's a strong connection and also a conflict in one's own identity between what it means to be a Muslim in the first place. So you'll find some Muslims who even question the fact that they come from a Pakistani origin or an Assyrian origin. They'd say, no, we are, Muslim Americans. That's where and they are quite vehement about the fact that they don't want to be associated with, these other cultures
That's quite interesting
Yeah,
because that's the view that we have,
yeah,
that even with African Americans, not
yeah,
just Muslims, like most African Americans, they won't, like, we call them African American.
yeah.
We don't call them,
Right, right.
African British here.
Yeah,
We just call them, oh, he's Congolese,
yeah.
he's from Ghana, he's from
Right, right.
Nigeria. But in America, it's like most of them, they're afraid to say that I'm
It's
from Nigeria, or I'm from Bangladesh, or I'm from Pakistan. It's like, no, I'm American.
no, it's really sad because you see that there is I don't know whether, we can chalk this up to an inferiority complex or what, but there's almost an insecurity that comes with one's identity. And I always try and remind many of my friends because we've had these discussions and I see the perspectives that they're coming from. But I can be like, yo, your best friend in high school, let's say his name is Scott.
Mm,
You ask Scott, where are you from? And this guy, not him, not his dad, not his grandfather, not his great grandfather have seen anything outside of Ohio or Kentucky or Texas. But he's going to be like, yeah, I'm one fourth Scottish, I'm one fourth British, I'm one third, Celtic, I am like,
mm,
German, whatever. And he has absolutely no problem with that. Why? Because at the end of the day, all of these identities that he carries, in terms of his heritage, do not conflict
mm.
with him being an American. And nobody was going to call that into question.
Yeah,
But I
yeah.
think many Muslims have this insecurity that my Americanness will be called into question, and they don't identify themselves necessarily with any other culture as much as like that their parents carried or so on and so forth. This definitely does exist. It's not so much the case when it comes to the British population. I think they're perfectly fine being, Pakistani. They're perfectly fine being, Indian and Arab and so on and so forth, Nigerian as well. And in fact, they keep strong ties. I mean, proximity plays a role, right? You're not
Yeah,
that
that's
far.
true.
People go back and forth quite a bit. Language also, it's maintained. Many people speak. In fact, in some cases, I've met people here who speak like Punjabi and Mirpuri and
And they
different,
can't speak English.
and they can't speak English
I
as
have
well.
to ask you one
Yeah.
question though before we move on to the UK. You are probably the best person to answer the question because you've been an imam in the US and you're an imam in the UK. And it is a bit controversial, but at least from my perspective, yeah, it seems like the US Muslims in the US are a lot more liberal than the Muslims in the UK, to the point where LGBT issues, it doesn't really affect them. They're not like disgusted by it in a sense. They just, it seems like they accept it. It seems like from or my perspective at least, they're okay to befriend some of these people. Is this the case?
Well, I think I'll say two things to this. The first thing is that a lot of what we see in the media is not necessarily what you find on the ground, right? The ground reality often
It's
differs
worse.
from the media. No, no,
Joke, joke.
quite the opposite. I think that uh, when you're living, okay, so to divide it further, America is not homogenous in this. So if you're in the South,
Yeah.
obviously there are different, approaches when it comes to LGBT. They tend to be more strict
Hmm.
about it. They tend to, value more family,
They're a lot more conservative,
a
innit?
lot more conservative in general. When you go to some of the more liberal cities, when you go to California, when you go to Washington State, when you go to New York, and so on, then there is, these are the centers and the capitals of liberal thought, right? And the liberal project in general, when we're talking about social liberalism. So they've had to tackle these issues. And I think we talked earlier about, the background that people came from, and that plays a huge role. Uh, you can't remove the history and the context which brought about these perceptions in the first
Mm.
place. When it comes to Muslims in the UK, they're very strongly tied to their identity and Muslim cultural roots that sees this behavior as repulsive, and that makes them almost, you know, uh, repelled just at the mention
Yeah.
of something like this. And that's not the case everywhere in the UK either, don't
Yeah,
get me
that's true.
wrong.
That's true.
I mean, we live in London
Yeah.
and I live not far from Brick Lane, so you can see there's a high level of tolerance between Bengali uncles and people who
Yeah,
are
of
perhaps
course.
trans. So and we've had this in like our masajid, where we've had to deal with these sorts of issues,
Allah.
and how we kind of navigate between
What,
not
Muslim trans coming in? Muslim.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Homosexuals and people
Hey.
who are trans and so on. And obviously, you don't want to close off the masjid to people just because of the background that they come from. At the same time, you don't want to compromise on your principle
No,
as
for
a
sure, for
Muslim,
sure.
and what we say about these issues. In America, I'm from Texas, right? Or that, at least that's where I kind of, identify with, identify with, no pun intended. But we don't have as much of a problem there in the day-to-day, uh, uh, workings that happen. Most masajid don't see issues like this.
It's quite conservative,
It's
isn't it?
quite conservative. But in other cities, I know that this is a problem, and this happens quite a bit. So, because the Muslims, in a lot of ways, they are trying to find their identity as Muslims anew, uh, they often have to, in my opinion, in my estimation at least, they have to find, there's kind of a cognitive dissonance at play. This, in the one hand, suggests that obviously we can say that this is not okay,
Mm-hmm.
and we close our doors to this entirely, and that's it, right? At the same time, you want your institutions to work within the system that exists there, and that forces you to compromise on a
Mm-hmm.
number of issues. Even politically, for example, you have to work along with other organizations and other parties, many of who are not Muslim, who have different values. But if you want to promote your own community, then you're forced to make some of these compromises, at least in the minds of these individuals. So what's happened is that this cognitive dissonance has occurred, where you are radically, trying to reconcile between two, polar
Mm-hmm.
opposites. And how do you do that? So many of the Muslims there, they've adopted, they've gone back to religious, first principles, and they've said, okay, what do we have within the Sharia? How does this allow us to operate within a context like this?
Mm-hmm.
And many of them, they use things like maslaha and the lesser of two evils, so like public benefit and so on and so forth. They quote these things in order to find some sort of a middle ground that allows them to operate in that society,
Yeah.
while at the same time, preserving their values, broadly speaking. And it's a very slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope. And it often overlooks a lot of the traps that come along with cognitive dissonance in general. So, like for example, there was a um, there was a rapper when I was a kid. I used to listen to him, and he mentioned one line which always like comes back to mind. He says it's okay to compromise in certain situations, but it's never okay to compromise yourself in any situation. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes we conflate between the two. So we end up compromising our values, our own identity as Muslims, and what it means to be a Muslim, for the efficacy of advancing
Of
in
society.
within society, that a society that we reside in.
Coming to the US elections now. Now, how bad was it for the Muslims when Trump was last president? And it looks like he's going to win. How bad will it get this time?
Yeah. So I think, to preface this question, I think it's important to clarify. I don't have a stance. I'm not specifically voting for any specific candidate, so I'm not going to try and speak from that. And also, I'm not a political analyst.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a credible political analyst. I can speak to the sentiments of Muslims on the ground, that I've heard, and that perhaps I, as an American, feel myself. Um, Muslims, it's, I will say, first and foremost, it is heartening, it is encouraging to see that Muslims have an ummah mindset. Yeah. So Muslims are often single issue voters.
Mm-hmm.
There are a number of issues that concerns Muslims, but when this Gaza issue started, this was the only thing that was important for the Muslims, and continues to be important for the Muslims, and will shape how Muslims vote in this current election cycle. If we want to go back to the Trump presidency, we see Muslims overall, in large part, are individuals who care about the global ummah, right?
Mm-hmm.
As much as you want to divorce it, and as much as you want to think that Muslims in America or in Britain are, very selfish about themselves and what's good for them as opposed to anybody else, no, you see that voting trends don't reflect that way. one of the main reasons that Muslims in America they allied with the Democratic Party for a long time was because of their foreign policy. They were thought to be better.
Mm.
When it comes to American empire, when it comes to, letting Muslims live, letting Muslims prosper and thrive throughout the globe. Of course, that didn't turn out to be the case in large part. But the shift happened when the first Iraq War started with Bush. Muslims in large part voted for Bush, and then because of some of the conservative stances and so on and so forth that he took. But eventually, after the war, they almost all shifted to Obama and the Democrats. Um, when Bush came into power, sorry, when Trump came into power, we were dealing with what? We were dealing with the aftermath of the Iraq War. We were dealing with the Afghanistan War. We were dealing with the expansion of drone warfare
Mm.
in Yemen, in Somalia, in different parts of the Muslim world. That was, that evoked a lot of anger with Muslims, and that fear was kind of increased because of Trump being
Mm.
Republican and Republicans not shying away from generally promoting the war machine and the
And
military-industrial
Trump being Trump.
complex, and Trump being Trump. No, you can't place him on a map easily. So Muslims had that fear, but as it turned out, and again, by no means was his presidency something that is a beacon for Muslims that they should be proud of. But in many ways, Muslims felt the pressures relieved and their concerns assuaged. A lot of the drone warfare got less, or a lot of the actual warfare was pulled back in a lot of
Mm.
places across the Muslim world. I don't remember about the drone warfare, but at least it went became less within the Muslim conscience and the public conscience. Um,
I just remember this whole stance about bringing back home.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
when he first became president.
Bringing back the troops, this is not something which is beneficial for us in the long term. And Trump, everyone says this, and I'll repeat it again. It's just I'll regurgitate the same fact. He's a businessman.
Mm.
Yeah, so he tries to see what is in the benefit of America, America as a nation itself, not necessarily certain lobbies or certain industries within America, and he cares a lot about his image as well.
Mm.
So he wants to be seen as the person who's brought about peace. He wants to be seen as the person who ended all the wars because it gives him clout over other politicians, right? But at the same time, he's beholden to a lot of, interest nonetheless, whether it's from his own family or whether it's from people who are close to him who have their own agendas.
Mm.
And so, I mean, part of that, we saw the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem, the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem, which led to protests in Palestine and led to the loss of some of our brothers and sisters in one of their marches that took place shortly afterwards. A lot of Muslims didn't perhaps like the Muslim ban that
Mm.
he instituted.
Yeah.
As an American, you can understand, how he sells it to the people, right? He's selling it as these places are not safe. Why are we bringing them here? But for Muslims who are there, a lot of their family members are from these countries, right? And they want to flee and escape persecution or so
Yeah.
on and so forth. So I don't, but at the same time, there were a lot of people, I think, so they had these issues, right? And because of these issues that they had, overwhelmingly in 2020, who did Muslims vote for? They voted for the Democrats,
Mm.
right? But I think the Democrats, for better or worse, they reared their ugly heads again, and it became, more transparent that they are not, a different party. They are not people with a different agenda. They are beholden to many of the same lobbies. They are beholden to many of the same interests that do not align with Muslims, and we know what has taken place in the last year. So when it comes to all of these issues, they've been exasperated by the Democratic Party. Muslims are leaving in them, they're abandoning them, and they're reflecting on. This is my understanding. They're reflecting on the Trump presidency with these rose-tinted glasses, where they're saying, "Oh man, things were so much better. We didn't have wars. We didn't have this. We didn't have that." Things were calm. The war on terror was not something that was in the forefront of people's minds, and everything that carries. Um, Perhaps, there was a level of relative peace that existed, and Muslims they care about this more than anything else,
Mm.
and the entire maslaha concept is driven on the back of this camel, foreign policy. So that was a major issue. Aside from that, I guess just to end it quickly, there are other issues that are concerning to Muslims as well. Obviously, family issues is one of those things. Muslims are generally not, they do not share the same values as the LGBT community when it comes to sexual morality. They don't, they're not liberal compared to Americans in general, even in comparison to a lot of Christians, right? They're
Mm.
fairly conservative. So, from these angles, it makes more sense that they would be allied with people who are conservative as opposed to liberal. And I think that many Muslims felt that under Trump, some of the policies that were domestic, whether it pertains to Roe v. Wade or others, was more in line with their own beliefs. So they also reflect on that, and they see the changes that have taken place within the last 4 years and the, kind of boost that has been given to a social liberal agenda under the Democrats is something that is very frustrating and very uh, fearful for
SubhanAllah.
the Muslims in America. Yeah,
No, it's quite shocking to hear. Like it's very refreshing to hear the way the ummah and the way the Muslim community in the US they see issues as one ummah, and they obviously voted for the Democrats because the Democrats they do the same thing but they hide it.
yeah.
And I think obviously everything's been exposed now. Now, from our perspective, we only see one side of what Trump says. Now, from from our perspective, it looks like he's got millions and millions of racist people who MAGA, make America great again, and the way they portray it seems like they want America to be all white. But now you're saying Muslims are, they're swaying towards the Republican Party. It's weird. It's like I can't square this issue.
I think a lot of this is how the media wants to portray MAGA, right? And I'm not here to defend MAGA. I really am not. But I try to, I think it's important for us as Muslims or people in general, for us to try and put ourselves in the shoes of others so that we can understand where they're coming from. That helps for better dialogue. Look, the media plays a big role. The media is generally liberal, right? The
Mhm.
media is not MAGA. The media is antithetical and opposed to MAGA and everything that MAGA stands for. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind what are the things that MAGA is carrying. So, of course, they're going to be presented in the liberal mainstream media as racist, as degenerates, as, low IQ, as all of
Mhm.
these sorts of things. Again, a lot of that is yellow journalism. A lot of that is, sensationalist. In reality, a lot of the beliefs that they hold, they're Christian beliefs. They are beliefs that are conservative. They are family values. They are these
Mhm.
things. Muslims do not disagree with any of these. In fact, when you really reflect on it, Muslims are the champions of many of these beliefs, not Christian beliefs, but belief in God, belief in Allah Azza wa Jal, belief in, holding on to the values that Allah has, given for society.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of shared common ground when it comes to that. Um, and so you have to be careful and then put yourself in the shoe of somebody who, there are of course racists that are, part of the conservative
Yeah,
movement.
yeah,
Undoubtedly there's
yeah.
people who think that to be to grow and to prosper as a society means you have to be white, right? There are people like that who exist, but at the same time there are people on the left uh, who are very similar whether they say it or not, right? A lot of liberals believe that European values are ultimately what is most progressive and create for a prosperous
Mhm.
society. You have individuals like Bill Maher and others who are very racist at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? And I was at SOAS, and this is one of the things I constantly reflect on. The whole idea and of these studies in academia, a very liberal academia, is decolonialist. We want to decolonize our studies and how we approach the global south and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
At the same time, you realize that decolonialist studies does not mean that you want to lift colonialism and the burdens of, the American exceptionalism or Western exceptionalism, the duty that they feel, the burden of the white man they feel. It's not lifting this burden. It's replacing the deity behind this burden and the values that are carried by
Mhm.
this burden with other values.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
what liberals do, right?
Mhm.
So liberals, they don't want white supremacy anymore. but they want liberal supremacy
Mm.
nonetheless. They want to continue imposing what they believe is an expression of freedom, an expression of free speech, and all of these things that ultimately is expressed through LGBT, is expressed through the trans movement, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you also have to keep in mind, look, on the ground, these are very heavily funded agendas, right? There are think tanks, there are lobbying groups whose perpetual goal is revolution. So they sought to legalize gay marriage, right?
Mm-hmm.
But once they get, yeah, and this is interesting. I have some relatives who were part of the Obama administration. They worked very closely with the administration, and I remember one of my relatives. He expressed he was very supportive of Obama. He loved a lot of the things he stood for. And then when he was pushed by Biden to kind of like come out and be very supportive of gay marriage and the legalization of gay marriage, I believe in 2010 or something, he expressed disappointment for the first time with this, with the direction that the party was trending in. Um, but you have to keep in mind these think tanks. Let's say they get one project done, right? Gay marriage has now been legalized in America and elsewhere. They don't stop existing, right?
Mm.
And they need something to keep them going. And I've listened to different thinkers speak about this. How are they going to keep doing that? They have to keep pushing the Overton window. They have to keep getting funding for more and more, the state of perpetual revolution. And this is what's happening within America right now, within the Democratic Party, within liberals in general. That's why you see these agendas being pushed more into the trans movement. There's even rifts that are starting between the trans movement and lesbians and gays. We know this whole thing with J.K. Rowling even here,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
TERF, right, movement, the trans exclusionary, whatever it is, um, radical feminism. So there are these rifts that are starting to
Mm.
grow within these people as well. But it's a cycle that keeps
Yeah.
perpetuating itself. Um,
And
and
unfortunately, Muslims get affected by it. You
Right,
know.
of course, Muslims get affected by it, but that's kind of getting back to the main issue. You see that this trend has been getting more and more extreme. People who were once left are now MAGA. Why? Because even they're like, look, we had a limit. We're, like, okay, even libertarians like, yes, we're social, like we want to keep our hands away. The government shouldn't like speak to the values of how people want to live their lives and what they want to do in their bedrooms. But at the same time, this is not what it's being restricted to. This is going too far, even for us, right? MAGA, a lot of MAGA are those people. They're
Mm.
people who, I mean, they're not they're very privy to all of the things that Trump stands for and has stood for. I mean, he has been an American icon for decades now, right? His start did not start in 2012 or in 2016 or 2015, wherever you want to place it. We've known him for since we were kids,
Yeah.
right?
80s and
And
90s.
we
Yeah.
know what he stands for, what he
Mm.
doesn't stand for at the end of the day. And he comes with a lot of so people are attracted to him. People are attracted to his personality as being very authentic. One of the things that he ran for was quote unquote clean the swamp, right?
Mm.
Because there is a large bureaucracy that exists within the government, and this bureaucracy is pushing interests that are not American interests, that are not the interests of the average working class American. Economically, we are struggling because of illegal immigration. We are struggling in terms of our social values and the family unit. We are struggling in terms of the foreign policy. We don't want to be interventionist. All of these things.
Mm.
So people who hold these values, who are a lot of people, they're painted as MAGA, right?
Mm.
and
Okay.
and and all they want is I want to go back to a time where we had a mother and a father and kids in the home, and my kid was
Normality.
going to school, and yeah, their normalcy, right? And for us, it's not much different than what Muslims in the UK perhaps see and envision for
Yeah.
their family. So when we just say MAGA and then we paint them all, and some politicians did to their own to their own demise, they painted them as a basket of radicals, of dummies, and so on and so forth. Um, and and ultimately, I think that 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 doesn't paint a real picture of who many of these individuals are. At the same time, yes, do they have people within them, your David
Mm.
Dukes and others, who are quite, racist, who are, quite, who do not like people of different cultures for the pure, sake of their own uh, uh, color and the DNA that they carry, yes, there are those people, and of
Mm.
course, like that's a problem.
I don't want to go too much into it, yeah. But January 6th, it seemed like America was a third world country, and with all the riots in the Capitol Hill. Now, if Trump wins, sorry, if Trump doesn't win, it seems like all hell is gonna break loose in America. It seems like there will actually be a civil war. What do you think?
No, again, I think a lot of this is sensationalized. Even January 6th, part of it is obviously it was, quite unexpected that something like that would happen. But it also kind of speaks to the American kind of unbridled, patriotic, take charge sort of,
Mm,
thing. So many of the people who were doing that, they weren't intending to overthrow the government. They were just, being reckless and crazy. And of course, many of them suffered the consequences of that. But then it also became a political tool, right? Trump was not the smartest in terms of, trying to draw a gray area there. He was turned on by a lot of the members of his own party, who eventually did not amount to much in terms of like a political voice and an independent Republican voice. But but the Democrats definitely did use it, and the liberal media in general did very much, try to you know, utilize that as a talking point and a podium with which people could vote. But I think Americans in general, this is my own like kind of perception. Americans never took that too seriously. That was more a nuisance than
but you're
anything
saying
else.
that they're not divided as it's
Yeah, yeah.
portrayed
I
to
don't
be.
think it's that divided. At least not at this stage, right? That division is definitely growing in terms of, family to family, what people consider okay, what people don't consider to be okay. But politically, in many ways, both sides of the party reflect the same coin. In fact, who was I was listening to somebody, maybe it was Imam Tom or it was somebody else. No, it was Professor Butchware. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on who it was, but they were speaking about how when Bernie was in the running,
Mm,
and he was put down by Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Democratic establishment, there was a real sense of revolution within the establishment, within the party itself, and within the constituents of the party. But today, when you go back, no, it's back to the establishment. It's back to the traditional lobbies. It's back to, okay, get on the back of Kamala, which again, and it's also very undemocratic in its sense as well. You have a person who was not voted by the Democrats to be running for president. She was
mm,
put there de facto. Not a very democratic process at all. And so you see the establishment is running that. The establishment is also, in a lot of ways, running the Republican Party too. So as much as Trump would like to be a cavalier, independent figure that has overtaken the Republican Party. No, in many ways, he is also beholden to the interests that they speak to. And you can see the effects of that because you had people within the Republican establishment that were starting to be very vocal about American interventionalism, such as Tucker Carlson,
mm,
such as Candace Owens, even Vivek Ramaswamy. They were starting to speak very openly about how this is not America's war. America doesn't need to get involved. And you saw early traces of that with Trump, but that was quickly put down. And especially after the assassination attempts on his life, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist who's trying to draw any connections, but you see that he is also towing the line on a lot of issues.
mm.
So the establishment on both sides are generally in the same place or within one spectrum that doesn't go too far on one side or the other. So I don't think when it comes to the figures of authority, there's not that many fissures and issues that exist. Yes, when it comes to the general population, the divisions are growing further and further, especially with the radical left movement and so on. But at the end of the day, people, because of this two-party system, um, they're pushed to the center in many ways. They have no choice. They have to select either this or this.
Mm,
And so even the window of expression is only so far.
yeah.
Otherwise, you end up, starting to get pushed outside of uh, um, an area, or you get pushed out of a voice of influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we have to be fair to the other side as well. We have to talk about Genocide Joe. Since October 7th, we've seen Muslims completely turn against Joe Biden and the Democrats. Will it affect them in the election?
Well, I think that it's very interesting. I've seen some statistics, or rather, like historical results, in 3 or 4 elections that have taken place so far. You always find that when approval ratings of the incumbent president, or when of the sitting president, are low, then the incumbent often loses, right? And this has happened historically with several different precedents. And Joe Biden's rating is incredibly low right now. And part of that is because obviously, he's been quite radical in a lot of his liberal beliefs. So he doesn't have any of like centrist America or right wing America with him to begin with. But a lot of the left leaning people that he did have are students, are young people, and for them, Gaza is a big issue. So even if they're not voting for him and they're refraining from voting, then this itself poses a big problem for him because he needs their vote. He needs their vote in order to win.
Or the Democrats in general, you
The
mean, yeah.
Democrats and Kamala needs the votes of these students. So they're definitely going to affect, and they have started to affect the polls, and you can see it, unfolding right now. There's a general hopelessness, right, when it comes to this, and I'll answer this. Look more specifically with the Muslims. There's a general sense of hopelessness. Nobody, I mean, historically, even nobody wanted to vote for Democrats among the Muslims, but they were forced to,
Mhm.
right? They were forced to because it's always the lesser of two evils. That's how it's presented to us as. Yes, you do have like these astroturf organizations that do not reflect grassroots Muslim, people. They are just seeds of the Democratic Party, placed very strategically in different places that claim to represent Muslims, but are in fact, responsive to whatever the Democrats want from them in that time and place. And these individuals might seem like, they're very pro-democrat and belief in democratic values, but generally Muslims are not like that in America. Muslims do not want the Democrats. They don't want the Republicans. They don't want people who ultimately do not care for what Muslims want in
Mhm.
Palestine and across the global ummah. But they're forced to choose between one or the other. That's how they see their options.
But we're seeing a third option now
Yeah,
come about recently. We're seeing that, and we're seeing a lot of Muslims actually advocating this, that we should vote for the Green Party.
right.
Now, tell us a little bit about the Green Party. I have not a lot of understanding about
Yeah,
the
I
Green
don't think
Party.
anybody does. No, again, like I said, I'm not a political analyst, so what I'm speaking from is just my general, like, kind of assumptions about about what the sentiments of Muslims are and where they find issues with these things. The Green Party, there's a couple things to mention about them. So, first and foremost, what do they stand for? They are often seen as being left to the Democrats, which is a problem to begin with when it comes to other issues like social issues, family values, and so on and so forth. Um, but when it comes to Gaza, they're very firm, they're
Mm-hmm.
very open. And the thing that perhaps highlights them beyond anything else is that they are an anti American imperialism. They think that American imperialism is the source of all corruption in the modern world. And what we need to do is stop being interventionist. We need to get out of other countries. So, like, I mean, even when you think about it, right, you think about the Imran Khans, you think about the Morsis, you think about Erdogan, you think about, anybody that you think about, even historically going back, you always find that when there is a Muslim revivalist sort of attitude that grows anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
the way that it's put down is in the back, the CIA is involved, the
Yeah.
American broader, uh, uh, military industrial complex is involved, and intelligence is involved. Um, they see that as a problem. They see that, and not just with the Muslim world, within Latin America and elsewhere, they see that, America has this, kind of chokehold, and they want to let America, so they see America as being the source of like most of the problems that exist politically in the modern world, and they want this grip to be loosened. That's
Mm-hmm.
the policy and the platform that they stand on when it comes to foreign policy. And when it comes to domestic policy, again, social issues, they're very left, they're very liberal. When it comes to economic issues, I can't speak so much. I don't know a lot of their internal stances, and I haven't looked into it.
But are they getting a lot of traction in the Muslim community?
Within the, so this is what they stand for, right? But they have a few issues. They have a few issues. One of those issues is obviously the left-leaning problems that they have. Their vice presidential nominee and candidate is Professor Butchware, who is a Muslim, and he says he is a black Sufi Muslim something or another. And he has studies traditionally as well. He's an academic, but he's also studied in West Africa, and he's gotten ijazat and mutun and so on. It's quite, something interesting that a
Mm-hmm.
person who's running for not a major party, but definitely the third major party,
Yeah, yeah,
is somebody who has like comes from a traditional Muslim
yeah.
background.
Mm.
Um, Now, how does that pair up with a very left-leaning party? How does that pair up with somebody who on social values are very left? And you see that even in the Green Party, there then arises the same problems that arose originally with Muslims allying and working with the Democrats, right? He was on a podcast recently with Sheikh Jalal on the Thinking Muslim podcast, and he was speaking to Islamic values, and he was admitting that, what we find in the Quran is that the actions of the people of Lut are sinful, but they're still Muslim, and you don't want the government involved in people's lives. If Muslims want to live the way that Muslims are going to live, we have to allow other people to live the way that they want to live. This is just the America that we have, and this is what we have to deal with. At the same time, today, then he was called out for several of his issues by the Greens,
Okay.
by the Green Party themselves, and he had to walk back a lot. So when it comes to, he was saying, LGBTQ whatever, brothers and sisters, that's how he was referring to them as. He says he's been a vocal advocate of them in the past,
Mm.
so on and so forth. So obviously this compromise nonetheless will exist. In any case, and forces us to compromise who we are, our identity itself as Muslims. So that's one issue. It is, and at the least you can say about that, that's a heterodox, point of view. That's one issue. The other issue is also with Syria. They've had problems in the past, the party, where they've expressed, you know, uh, apathy, to say the least, when it comes to the Syrian
Mm.
revolution and the brothers and sisters, many of them who lost their lives there. In some ways, they've even, been seen as being supportive of Bashar al-Assad. But Jill Stein was on the podcast as well, and I watched parts of it recently. She tried to backtrack from a lot of that. Um, at the end of the day, politicians are politicians, right? So when it's not favorable for them to say certain
Yeah.
things, they won't say certain things, or they'll backtrack in different ways. Um, with the Uyghur brothers and sisters, this is another issue, right? Within the Green Party, and Professor where he was speaking about this, you have a group of people within them who are known as tankies. These are individuals who are just against U.S. militarism. Alhamdulillah. They're against U.S. imperialism. But when it comes to Marxists, when it comes to communists, when it comes to socialists, they will be supportive of, tyrants no matter what, right? They will always find excuses and exceptions
Mm.
for them. And this is what they did with the Soviet Union. This is what they're doing. I mean, people in the past, that's what they did. They would see America as being problematic, but they would always find justifications for Russia. You have people like that today as well. They find problems no matter what with America, and no matter what, they find excuses with Bashar al-Assad.
Mm.
And many people in this party do the same thing with China. So they see a problem with America and every single thing, but just because the values, the greater ideological values align with their communist beliefs, they will support the Chinese CCP no matter what.
Mm. They will
Um,
even sometimes deny the genocide is actually happening to the Uyghur
of course,
Muslims
of
as well.
course.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's not all of them in the Green Party, right?
Mm.
Even Professor Ware, he admitted that the CCP, they are persecuting Muslims. They're persecuting not only Muslims, the Uyghurs, but also the um, They're also persecuting the Tibetan Buddhists and so on and so forth. So yeah, the last thing is the issue of
They're accepting the
yeah,
Chinese.
of the Chinese. So you have people that are split within the Green Party on this issue, anyways. There are some who are very, pro, but those are seen as the radical elements within that party, and then you have others who are okay with admitting that this is a genocide and so on and so forth, persecution that's going on. Now, the party definitely has problems, right? As we can see, we don't agree with those leftist values when it comes to social issues. We don't agree with how they paint, other forms of tyranny globally. And obviously, just because somebody is the enemy of my enemy does not necessarily make them my friend. As Muslims, we understand this. We are a global ummah, right? So if our brothers and sisters are suffering at the hands of America, at the hands of Russia, at the hands of China, they're still suffering, and we don't
Mm-hmm.
support one just in place of the other, right? That's a big problem. Um, how do Muslims approach this? Like again, not astroturf Muslims, but more Muslims grassroots, like who are actually part of the community. You have people such as Imam Tom and others who are supporting the Green Party, and they're encouraging people to vote for the Green Party. And what they mention is very interesting, to say the least. One thing that they're mentioning is that this means that we are not voting for Kamala Harris. We cannot support the Democrats, especially in crucial states that are swing states. They're toss-ups. Uh, we don't want to vote for Trump. Obviously, he's presenting to us that he's going to do the same thing that these people have been doing as far as Gaza is concerned. So, if we are a collective and we come together and we all vote for the Green Party, we know for a fact the Green Party is not going to win. So it's not like we're supporting any of their policies, right? We're not saying
Mm-hmm.
we people have this idea that like you're picking a horse in a race. No, you're being more strategic about what you're doing. You know this horse is not going to win no matter what, right? It's not going to win. So when you're picking that, you're not picking them in order to, expect that they win or something would happen there. You're doing it for a very strategic reason, which is twofold. One is to show your disillusioned with the other two parties.
Mm-hmm.
You want to show that you're not part of this. At the same time, you don't want to stay at home because the presumption is that this is a wasted vote. This is remaining aloof from the process. This is actually showing that Muslims are apathetic, and so nobody is going to like curry their favor, as opposed to what the Greens are doing now. They're actually going on Muslim podcasts, they're speaking to Muslims, and they're trying to curry their favor. So he's saying one thing is to show your disillusionment with this. At the same time, the second thing that this does is if they get to 5%, then they get a certain amount of allotted funding that
Yeah.
that is taken from elsewhere and that's given to them.
Mm-hmm.
And and this shows that the Muslims are actually an influential group of people that are to be fought after. Um, the other thing is, what is the future, right? How do we like politically create a sort of vehicle by which we can have greater influence, not just be like you know these people are guaranteed our votes or these people are guaranteed our votes. How do we have autonomy in what we say and how we affect what happens? And so uh, one of the proposed solutions is that look, we have people like Butchware, who's a Muslim, who's already,
Mm.
he's the vice president nominee for that party. There are people, Muslims, who are involved, and so why don't we try and essentially take over the Green Party from within? We can't win the Democrats, obviously, we can't win the Republicans, but maybe we can have a much stronger influence on the Greens. I think in some ways this is also fallacious. It's not a perfect argument either, because for example, the same thing is happening with like Professor Ware and others, where they are very much compromising to
Mm.
the establishment of the Green
Yeah.
Party, right, and what they believe and what they think. And so, for you to be a part of that, you still have to compromise your values at the end of the day. Um, and I think the efficacy of not participating in certain circumstances is often undervalued, and it's seen as just a thrown away thing. But if it is done in a very organized fashion, there is definitely value to it.
As an imam,
Yeah.
are you saying that we should boycott the elections in the US for US Muslims?
I don't want to get canceled. I'm not saying anything. No, look, I think we have to take a look at a few things here. So first and foremost, uh, uh, political governance is built on certain principles, or there are certain theories of how government works. One of those is the social contract theory. This was proposed by Locke and others that when you're in a perpetual state of equilibrium. Everybody gets their rights, everybody gets everything. Nobody needs to fight, nobody needs to do anything. You're good, everything is perfect. But this is a utopia, right? And what it lacks in this lived world and this lived experience of ours in society is security. So how do we attain security? How do we attain protections, guaranteed protections? This is, we give up certain, values. It's not values. We give up certain rights, and we confer it over to the government. The government then protects us and facilitates everything, and that's how society functions. When people start to pull away from believing in the government reflecting what they want, they have a revolution, they overthrow, and they replace that with another government. This was the theory that was proposed. So, and even the German political philosopher more recently, Hannah Arendt, she talks about this as well, where you are, by being politically active, by taking part in the process, you are, it's a form of a stamp of approval.
Mm.
You are advocating for the system. You're advocating whether you like it or
You're
not. At a
validating it
level,
in a sense, yeah.
yeah. There's a level of validity that comes along with it, and we'll speak about this because Muslims don't have this perspective generally. But whether or not you're coming from a different perspective, what is happening, and like in the end consequence, is that the system is being validated to continue and to prosper. Now, which is something to take a deeper look at. Now, when it comes to Muslims specifically, why are Muslims getting involved? Right? Muslims, like we mentioned at the beginning, they are not necessarily getting involved because they believe in the validity of the system in and of itself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the political design and the design of the government, they don't necessarily believe that that is the most that is where the greatest divine efficacy lies for running a system of governance. That's not necessarily the case. But they're voting, or rather, let's say, then if we take a step back and we look at the theological implications, there's one of four things that you can arrive at. One, some of the ulama, you don't find this being mentioned anymore at all, and because it, to be fair, it doesn't actually accord with why people are doing what they're doing, or what they believe, essentially, even. But some of the ulama, they said that this could fall into shirk. Why? You believe that this is tahkim, or this is ihkam, establishing and ruling and being pleased with something other than which Allah Azza wa Jal He legislated, right? If you believe that this is correct, if you believe that
Mm.
this is better, if you believe that this is the right way, as opposed to what we were taught in our faith in terms of how to set up society and so on and so forth, then you believe something is better that is external to Islam, and this is very theologically problematic, of course.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about voting in a democratic system, yeah?
Right. Generally, we're talking about the democratic system and the social contract pertaining to the democratic system.
Sorry, I cut you
Uh,
on number two. You were saying,
Yeah.
yeah,
So just going back, yeah. So we're talking about the theological implications of that, the broader things before we get into the more practical implications. So that was one, So that's one. If you believe and you kind of subscribe to the notion that this is a greater ideal than something that
yeah.
Islam has prescribed. Not to say that there aren't components of different, sorts of systems and thoughts that we have, but ultimately you believe that the Islamic way of setting up society is inferior to something else. That's problematic theologically. But then you move on to the other positions. Then, okay, you say like the belief of Muslims is not that this is necessarily the best case
Mm-hmm.
scenario for us, but we have inherited, a reality, and we have to work with that reality. So how do we work with that reality? How do we engage with it? We don't believe in it, but we do believe in engagement because we have to promote the Muslim cause. So engagement includes to step back and to not be part of the process. It includes being part of the process and trying to change the process and make it better. And it includes just giving in and just accepting that we said that the last thing is not okay. So between these two, how do we as Muslims react? So some of the ulama, they mentioned that it's permissible to vote, and some have gone even so far. I think in the UK, you guys say that we are, more liberal, but some of our mashayikh, and I see the perspectives that they're coming from, where they say it's even wajib to take part in this process, right? So I think that you know, perhaps I don't necessarily, I'm personally not inclined to believe that it's wajib to partake in it, simply for the reason that, you know, you're saying that somebody is sinful for, you know, stepping away from it,
Mm,
and sinfulness, you know, that's a divine decree on an individual, and for you to say that, you need to be very well aware. Of this being an issue of that is qat'i, that is, you know, definitive, that not doing so is going
mm,
to be harmful, and that there are no other means that
yeah,
are, you know, politically viable or even theologically viable for you to
yeah.
stay away from it. So it's at least a tough pill to swallow. I'll say that at the least. I do understand the perspective that that people come from in that, nonetheless. But okay, so then we talk about, you know, we're talking about voting and we're talking about being politically active. Oh, well, what about restraint? What about not going to the polls? Is that effective at all, right? And I think the general notion that people have is that it's not effective. That is something that, you know, is in the back of my mind, something that I question. I've listened to some of the arguments for it. Um, I've listened rather to some of the arguments against it, and I feel that, you know, there's a few issues. One of those issues is how do we react in times of fitna? So theologically, what have we been taught when it comes to how we react in times of fitna? You'll find many proofs that people say, okay, it's allowed to be politically active. They'll give you, you know, proofs from Najashi and the people speaking
Mm,
to him, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib and others. And so they're politically active. But again, that's a different model. That's a different system. Nonetheless, the idea of being politically active is found in one way or another. When you're going to an issue of like voting and you're going to the polls, how do we like practically, is there any, is it the best way to be there as opposed to restraint? What is more effective? What is less effective? This is, I think, more open for discourse, right? One of those things that we can draw upon theologically, perhaps it's related, perhaps it's not entirely related. I'm just, you know, thinking out loud. The Prophet ﷺ, he advised that
mm,
during times of lots of fitna, lots of confusion, it is best you stay indoors. It's best you stay at home. You know, the person who is sitting is better than the person who is standing, who is better than the person who is running, and so on and so forth. Now, that is when you perhaps can definitely not affect change, right? And you are only putting yourself in a place that is more problematic, even within your own conscience. And I think that in many ways, I see an overlap with that with our current, you know, reality where we stand. You know, oftentimes we end up voting for beliefs that are radically discursive to what we hold, and put us, you know, at least in my conscience, put us in a very troubling, you know, spiritual state.
mm,
Uh, there is restraint has that value, if nothing else, right? It is not that you sitting back is because you have apathy, you don't care, you're a terrible person. All of these things, the way it's presented, you don't care about the human. No, a lot of the times it's because you know, a person who might restrain themselves is because they are deeply spiritually, you know, aware of the implications of what something like this means for themselves and for the ummah. And so they don't want to act in a way or with haste or anything of that nature that isn't really firm. And so there's something to appreciate about that. Just as there is something to appreciate about people who do participate with good intentions to change something. So I want to highlight that at the same point, at the same time. A person might be, you know, and you might disagree with who they're voting for, how they're choosing to vote or be politically active, but that's one thing, and the other thing is questioning their intentions. I think it's easy for people to fall into questioning one another's intentions, and as Muslims, if we are an ummah, you know, an important facet is to not, you know, question people's intentions and try to understand them at least. So essentially, so what is the efficacy of this? What is the efficacy and the usefulness of restraining yourself? It's a form of boycott, right? And boycott, I think, when it comes to everything else that we're doing, boycott definitely plays a big role. Boycotting and divesting, we're seeing this in terms of like products, and it's obviously not the same analogy, but there is something to be said about you and your political participation through voting within the process itself, and what that reflects on term, you know, in terms of the social contract. Now, the converse like reply is that, okay, the social, you know, contract theory that exists, it's also relative. I mean, U.S. political participation is already like sub 50% or something of that nature. There's more people that are voting for American idol as opposed to the the precedent. At least this was the case when I was younger. But nonetheless, when there's a collective effort, and it's a highlighted effort, and it doesn't mean that you're not politically inactive. You're active in other ways, but one of those ways is that you're showing your abstainment from this, your boycott, your divestment from this. It has an effect. It has a global effect as well, right? In terms of how people perceive the United States. So you were talking about how January 6th, people did not vote. They didn't go to the ballot box. They took something else, and this
Mm.
made the world look at America as a third world country. They couldn't accept and they couldn't fathom how something like this could happen, right? Even though ultimately, I don't think it amounted to much, but this kind of breaks the sort of hegemony that exists of American exceptionalism and imperialism globally, that's out there. Even in South Africa during apartheid, you found that people were not voting the ethnic population that was there, the ethnic black population that was not there, and that had an effect globally in terms of how the UN perceived it, in terms of how people started to perceive apartheid. So we're doing this with Israel, obviously, but at the same time, America is probably the greatest supporter and, in fact, the fundraiser for a lot of what's going on. So why don't we have a collective effort? So this is one thing in the back of my mind, and I know it's not a flawless argument either, but it does help fulfill two things. One, in terms of your conscience, right? And some people might argue that no, it doesn't help you, keep a clean conscience either, but you are you do carry some responsibility for participation, definitely, for not participating actively with certain intentions, right? How much are you to blame? How much are you not to blame for that? That's something which is definitely open to discussion. I think that if somebody is considering the implications of what it means to partake in a fitna, if they're considering the implications of what their actions themselves yield, then then there is certain value that is associated with holding restraint. But that's one option that exists, and people who vote for third party, they who vote for the Greens, they have they have very astute, I would say, political ideas in what they want to achieve. Now, again, how much that would come about, considering what we've seen in the past
Mm.
with the Democrats, and considering what we see with their own candidates who are Muslim today, and how they're kind of succumbing to the same,
Precious.
pressures, is questionable.
Mm.
It's questionable.
But on this, I know it might be a bit controversial, but would you say that people who do vote, either Democrats or Republicans, are complicit in the US's foreign policy?
Yeah, I think that this is an issue that goes back to intentions of people, right? Whether or not, whether we like it or not, in many ways we are all complicit in what the West does, right? Just by the value of living and existing and paying taxes and all of these things, people
Mm.
can legitimately question us
Mm-hmm.
for the complicity that exists alongside this, right? And this is something we have to think about in a larger picture. We have to think about, okay. Um, but at the same time, we would respond then, okay, what are the alternatives? I had a brother that I spoke with once. He's quite a popular speaker, and he's very critical of American foreign policy as well as left wing ideology and so on and so forth. And I asked him, why don't you go to like a Muslim country, for example? And he said that I am legitimately safer here in terms of what I'm saying and what the larger intelligence apparatus is capable of doing if I'm somewhere else as opposed to here. So there are these very real, issues
Mm.
that do exist, and the preservation of life is very important, as is the preservation of faith. And then you also go back into like kind of like what the legal implications. Okay, if you're able to express your faith to a certain degree, do you have to move? Do you not have to move? If you do move, then what are the alternatives? Are you able to express your faith somewhere else in a better way? Yes or no? All of these things come back to political participation as well. So yes, you are complicit, undoubtedly. You're complicit if you vote Republican, if you vote Democrat. You are complicit by the simple, sake of staying and existing within that system. You are
Mm.
complicit. We are all complicit to a certain degree. The question that returns is, okay, are we actively seeking this? And I
Mm.
don't think anybody is actively seeking, to harm Muslims. That
No, of
is not
course.
the intention of any Muslim, or unless they're munafiqeen, and then they have bigger issues to worry about, right? Um, But yeah, so the Muslims who are voting this way or that, they're considering the lesser of two evils, and by that value, Allah forgive them if and Allah forgive all of us for being complicit to whatever degree that we
Mm.
are complicit. Um, but I don't think that their intention is that, and I won't hold them to that. But this doesn't mean that we just leave ourselves entirely, because again, we are in this vicious cycle of the lesser of two evils, and there's a problem. There's a larger, broader like problem with this if you really think and reflect on it, isn't there? Because Muslims or anybody, we're not meant to live in a perpetual state of choosing evil, right?
Yeah,
We're
spot on.
not meant to be products and factors and benefactors of that evil, right? We're not meant to be, working in this dynamic. If you want to, kind of imbibe a slave mentality within your mind, this is how you do it, right? This is how, I mean, so many times you find in the Quran examples of Bani Israel, right? We see over and over again people choosing things and behaving in certain ways that, that reflect their lack of independence, their lack of freedom, their lack of autonomy and choice. And that comes when we live holistically in a way that Allah Azza wa Jal told us to live, right?
Mm.
And that might make us endure some problems when it comes to social, I mean, when it comes to economic issues, when it comes to whatever. But those are the growing pains of, building uh, a civilization and a society that is pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jal. That is how the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did it.
Yes.
That is what the Muslims had to go through when they were rebuilding, after the Crusades and so on and so forth. And that is the process that is going to be required today. The question we have to ask is, okay, what role do we play in that bigger picture?
Mm.
Oftentimes we are just, succumbed into this smaller picture and being concerned with right now, what do I have to do in order to survive until the next moment, right? We're not thinking about that bigger picture. And even when we start to think about a bigger picture, the problem that many of us we fall into is we think of a bigger picture within the paradigms of a system that itself forces us into that which is not favorable to us as Muslims.
Mm.
So we have to think beyond this, right?
Which brings me to my question. As an imam, who should we vote for then if we're living in the US?
Yeah. Again, this is an interesting question. So whether we should restrain or vote, this is one question, and then if we are voting, who are we voting for? This is another question. And to be honest, like again, I see these perspectives. I see all the perspectives that people are coming from. Some people are suggesting we vote for Harris, and why are we going to vote for Harris? Because Trump is going to make things worse. You heard what was said at recently in one of his conventions. I don't remember who it was exactly, um, Giuliani or Gingrich or one of these people. They mentioned something like, the Palestinians are taught to kill us at 2 years old and so on. So there's a lot of hatred there.
Mm.
Trump has asked Netanyahu to finish the job, for example. So there are these issues that are very, very problematic, undoubtedly. Um, but at the same time, there's two things to look at it. One is with Trump, he speaks a lot, and we know that his policies are not often reflective of what he says. Um, he speaks to the crowd, right?
Yeah.
And Muslims have had a good experience last time, as opposed to, a lot of what he said. Not to say that it was perfect. The other issue is that and Imam Tommy mentioned this as well when we were looking at kind of the lesser of two evils. Yes, let's say in the immediate, you have to envision the lesser of two evils in two ways. One is in the immediate, the other is long term. So yes, in the immediate, perhaps the lesser of two evils is to continue the genocide and not let it get worse. But as Machiavellian as it sounds, perhaps, what has happened within the last year, the whole globe, non-Muslims included, have woken up to the travesty that is taking place and to the innate, built-in, mechanisms of oppression
Mm.
and genocide and different things that exist, and they are speaking out against it in a way that they didn't speak out before, right? And so perhaps even if things do get worse, this will force people to bring about change. This will force people to lift their support, right? And it's a difficult, again, it's a difficult Machiavellian idea which I don't support, simply because we don't want to see the loss of any Muslim life in Gaza or anywhere else. So but that is one thing that was mentioned, which I thought I would share. um Nonetheless, do you lend your support for something like that? That's do the means justify the end sort of situation. It's really, it's a precarious. um But so this is something that people who are supporting Harris, this is what they suggest, things will get worse. And then these are some of the arguments against that. People who are supporting Trump, right? The arguments against Trump are also very explicit, and they're very clear. He is perhaps going to allow the situation to get worse, more likely than not. He is a person who is very questionable in terms of his own moral character and all of these things, which is also true. I mean, on the other side, right? They tried to the Democrats, they try to present themselves as the purveyors of like morality, when in reality, we know that they're the furthest thing from that. Just in terms of like one thing that I mean, what they promote, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is an important issue as well. So like what the professor was saying earlier, he was saying that what you do in your bedroom is your concern. We don't want the government coming in. Yeah, if only that was the reality. The reality is that this, liberal agenda is seeping into our schools.
Mm-hmm.
Our children are being taught this. They're being forced to repeat and regurgitate these values. So it's not something that is restricted to the bedroom, as would be like to believed. And that also then has an implication on people's belief. Yes, Muslims who may partake in something of this nature could be forgiven by Allah. We don't question their faith. But if they start to then say that this is permissible, this is allowed in Islam, we should be okay with this as Muslims, right? And theologically, then yes, this adds a big question mark on their faith. Um, and then just even more so, the not only do they promote, if we say that the action of filth and immorality is not as bad as its promotion, right, mujahara, then at the same time the Democratic Party is promoting, right, and that promotion is worse than the action itself. Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, interestingly, an early 20th century scholar, he speaks about this in a book he wrote on feminist thought. He said, and he was in exile in Egypt, and he said that there are individuals who, there are women who might live in a very immoral way. They're not as bad. Allah might forgive them, but Allah won't forgive the person who promotes this immorality
Mm-hmm.
within the Muslims. That is a much more severe sin. Uh, um, yeah. So promotion is worse generally. On top of that, also, it's not like they don't partake in immorality. I mean, and this is nothing to say about we don't know, right? But a lot of this, when you look at the Democrats themselves, when you look at Kamala Harris's history, both in terms of how she got into political positions of power, also in terms of like questioning her own identity and race and these issues and how she plays to different crowds, you can see that she's a politician through and through. Her own husband, I believe, there were some issues with him and his like ex partners and I don't know the exact details of it, but for somebody who promotes supporting women and so on and so forth, it's questionable at the least. So nobody is perfect on, on either side, right? There are all of these issues that do exist with them, and then the third party, of course, we spoke about that at length throughout. So there's issues in all of this. I'm not here to say vote them, or vote them. Again, go back to the political authorities among the Muslim leadership that we have that are trusted in the community, and speak to them. And I'm listening to them as well. And I myself, I'm in a state of like a lot of confusion, to be honest. Um, about what the best pragmatic course of action is. But one thing I will say is that when all is said and done, in times of fitna like this, in times of severe confusion and strife, it's important that we as a Muslim community and ummah don't lose ourselves against one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, perhaps somebody who's voting for Harris, as dumb as you might think that option is, and like you have to punish the Democrats, and you have like, yes, I'm with you on board on all of these things, but that person who is voting for them, um, you know, I'm I understand the confusion that
Mm-hmm.
exists, and I'm not going to condemn that person to the hellfire for that action, right? I'm not going to do the same with somebody who's voting for Trump or third party. And I'm definitely not going to do that with somebody who chooses to abstain. And I think anybody who is starting to attack Muslims for how they're voting in times of such political confusion or not voting is the person who has lost the plot more than anything else or anyone else, right? This is a time for unity. This is a time for Muslims to come together, to organize, to develop these ideas, to build an independent identity, and to start thinking about bigger factors and how we affect change that goes beyond just current contemporary voting or political models or so on and so forth. How do we revive the ummah? This is what we need to be coming together and thinking about. And one of the first things that is required for that process to take place is just mercy. Is to have rahmah with one another. Allah
Mm.
Azza wa Jal, this is how He describes the believers. Muhammadur Rasulullah, وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُم. These are people who are severe against disbelievers, and the companions who are the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, they are severe against the disbelievers and they are merciful among themselves, right? And we don't want to flip this, right?
Yeah,
We
for
don't
sure.
want to flip the script, and like we don't want to be in a place where we are always making excuses and justifying the characters and behaviors of people who who are not Muslim, who do not subscribe to our values, who do not subscribe to our morality, and
Mm.
always trying to find an excuse and support them while being very critical of our Muslim brothers and sisters. And no matter, in what they're doing, and especially in such times of confusion, it needs to be the opposite. We need to have a very strict, severe glance when it comes to how people are behaving, who do not represent us. While it comes to, our own brothers and sisters, we need to display an extra level of mercy and kindness and forgiveness and so on and so forth.
Bringing this podcast to a close, we've talked about the different um, actions that you can take for Muslims in the US and for the Muslims in the UK. What is the MO, the Muslim opinion on Muslim political participation?
At the end of the day, Muslims stand diametrically opposed to secularism. Secularism is the belief that your religion stays in your home, in the masjid, or in the church, the private sphere. Whereas in the state, in the public sphere, it's the state, it's the decisions that we make. No, as Muslims, we are informed by our deen when it comes to your home, when it comes to the masjid, and when it comes to politics as well. Muslims have to be politically active. Now, what form does political activity take? Can it take the form of voting for XYZ? Can it take the form of thinking about greater issues? Can it take the form of restraint in certain cases? All of these things are possibilities for those who are leaders within the Muslim Ummah, those who are activists, those who are politically engaged. It is incumbent upon them to learn their deen if they're not aware of that. And if they are aware of their deen, then allow it to inform the decisions that they make. And at the end of the day, we hope and trust that Allah Azza wa Jal will protect us as an Ummah. He has always protected us and He will continue to protect us and revive us. We simply are going to be part of this project. For the rest of us who are following our scholars, our shuyukh, our leaders, then we need to do the most that we can in order to make dua for them, in order to listen to them, in order to act together as a cohesive Muslim community, and to have a lot of mercy with one another. And we should be looking beyond. We should be looking to the future. This election is going to come and it's going to go. Many elections will come and many elections will go. If the extent of our thought and our participation is restricted to the paradigms that we have inherited, which continues to put us in a cycle of evil, there is a problem with that.
Mm.
We need to escape this and we need to think very critically and together as a community on how we do so. And I pray that Allah Azza wa Jalla allows us to attain that understanding, gives us that insight, and allows us to have a brighter future tomorrow than what we have today.
Inshallah. I think definitely we need to start looking past just the reactionary stuff that are being thrown at our faces, whether it's the US election, UK election. Exactly what you said. The Muslims need to come together and figure out a way to get rid of this situation. You said it perfectly of perpetual evil, choosing evil, lesser of two evils. There's an inherent problem with that, but ultimately it is living under a just Islamic state, under the way Allah Azza wa Jal has told us to live, making sure that we abide by the Sharia. I think that's clear. I think that's
Yeah.
clear. But Ustad, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair, it was amazing talking to you on this issue. I think you enlightened us about how much you know about politics, to be fair.
Not at all, Allah, but I mean to the dua, and may Allah Azza wa Jalla allow us to continue being of service to the deen and to His
I
ummah.
mean,
And again, at the end of the day, the whole question is precipitated by, and the whole like conversation is precipitated by what's going on with our brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And may Allah Azza wa Jal just, may Allah help them, may Allah aid them, may Allah Azza wa Jal rescue them from the state that they are in, may Allah Azza wa Jal allow them to get the justice that they deserve both in this world and in the next. And may Allah Azza wa Jalla allow us to be a part of helping them and standing along with them. Jazakumullah khair for having me on.
Barakallahu feek. No. And on that note, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.